Welcome to Wolf's Watch. Today we have a special interview with someone who can help you find funding, find incentives for your business. We are pleased to have Marty Abbott with us. Marty he's one of the foremost experts in the country in state, county, and local incentives for from government for corporations. There's a lot of pools of money, not just the COVID funds that were publicized so well, but there's a lot of other long-term sustainable sources of help from local, state, and county governments. And as president and founder of the, I'm reading as you're watching this, making sure I get this right, Incentive Management Group, Inc. He's president and founder of Incentive Management Group, Inc. Marty has 25 years of experience negotiating incentives for corporations to enhance the ROI of capital investments and also to increase skills within your company so that you can achieve your business goals. And it's hugely important. He's also negotiated large incentive packages over the years for companies such as, check this out, American Standard, Crane Company, Energizer, Hubble Inc., McCain Foods, Pactiv, Train Air Conditioning, and many, many more. Over the years, he's met with many state heads of economic development and governors of different states. Marty Abbott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Jeff. Not a problem. I'm going to enjoy this, I think.
I hope so. And as you're watching this, if you've got questions, this is live and interactive. If you're watching this live, put your questions in the comments, and because we're watching the comment feed, and we love to interact with you. If you are watching the replay, put your questions in the comments anyway, because we watch afterwards to see what you're asking and get your questions answered as well. So, Marty, I'll dive right in with everything that happened with COVID. The funds that were made available to businesses were so well publicized, unlike many of the other incentives that are available. It was available for a wide range of businesses, but that's only short term. What kinds of incentives are there for businesses going forward as the COVID incentives are starting to expire?
There's two big categories of incentives for businesses. One is when you're growing a business, and the other is when you're developing your people. Those are the two main categories. So employee growth is one, and employee training is the other. Those are the two big ones, and the employee growth is of the two that I'm mentioning. Employee growth is 3 to 4 times bigger.
3 to 4 times bigger. That's really a huge emphasis on the employee growth.
Yeah, the training funds that are available within most states are limited to a certain dollar amount that are budgeted every year. And in most states, those funds are going to range anywhere from, let's say, small states, $2 million, all the way up to large states as high as $50 million. Those funds are limited, and they're budgeted every year. On the other hand, employee growth is unlimited in terms of funding, because what the states are doing, state, county, and local governments are doing, is they're allowing the company that is causing the employee growth to participate in the additional tax revenues that are coming in to state, county, and local governments. So the term that's used in the industry is that is foregone revenue by state, county, and local government. So let's say a project is started, and that project is a manufacturing facility or some service company is being added to a local economy, and 100 jobs are being placed into that economy. What the state, county, and local governments are willing to do is to take the future stream of revenues that they'll enjoy from income taxes, property taxes, and so forth, and share those with the company that's causing that growth. So that's why the term foregone revenue. They're going to forego some revenue on their part over maybe 5 or 10 years in order to give that money to the company up front. A lot of it's up front, in order to give that money to get the project for their local economy or their state economy.
So it's really reflecting their willingness to invest in the future, because they know that the companies that are investing in their people are going to be contributing much more to their tax base and to the community at large.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, if the way the governments are looking at it is that if we don't incentivize the company to come here by offering them 20% of the income that we could get if they come here, if we don't offer that incentive to them, maybe they'll just go someplace else and we'll never have any income. So rather get 80% of a number than 0% of a very low number, nothing.
Yes, yeah, and I had talked to a head of economic development for one of the cities in California, and there was a major corporation that was asking for bids to locate their new West Coast headquarters from different cities where they wanted to locate, and their particular city was one that they were very interested in, and they decided not to reply because they felt that they had so much, they didn't get into the game. They felt they had so much appeal to the company that it wasn't necessary, and unfortunately that company and several thousand jobs went to a different city.
Companies can be I mean, when we're in a project, the company is taking a look at all of the factors, economic factors, that will determine their success. And in the case that you just mentioned, if it turned out that locating in a very favorable environment for a company, such as a huge number of qualified workers, a very supportive government, not financially supportive, but supportive in terms of permits and so forth, if that is the way the company is going to make the most money, they'll figure that out and they'll come out with an ROI on that project. And that will beat out a company that's willing to offer massive incentives, a community or an economic area. So everybody's doing their own math, but in most cases, the government, the only support that the government is going to be able to give is the money, the share of revenue that they're going to get. And so that economic, when we do a project, most of the time, the difference between locating in town A or town B or state A or state B in terms of the cost factors and so forth to the company are relatively minimal. They're going to need to be, for instance, in a suburb of a city in order to attract the kind of people that they need. So the cost of doing that in most states that they would be considering is going to be about the same. So what it comes down to is, to a large extent, unless there's some unusual circumstances like shipping costs or something else, it comes down to what are the incentives that are going to be offered that is going to change the financial profile of the opportunity for the company.
And one thing, anything related to government programs, and I guess this is because of my aerospace days. I started my career out working for aerospace companies. Concern I always have with government programs or anything working with the government is the blizzard of paperwork and the sometimes complicated processes that go with that. I mean, how do companies navigate that? I mean, it's almost especially all on its own to understand those processes and whatnot. How can companies navigate that without ending up adding, one or two full-time people just to deal with the paperwork and the process?
Some of the very big companies will do what we do for most of our clients. Will do it on their own, and they will have a good-sized staff that's capable of doing it. One of the biggest companies that was doing it on its own, and there aren't many that do it totally on its own, but let's say that there's this one example of a company that had 5 people full-time working on government incentives and managing the government incentives. For most companies, that's not going to be a possibility. They don't want to do that. They don't really want to try and be expert in this field. And so hiring somebody like ourselves is something that makes a lot of sense. And most of the time, the other consideration is that these projects, the flow of these projects within a single company is very inconsistent. The workload is very inconsistent. So when we work for our largest client, which is McCain Foods, I would say in some years we're working, overtime to get the work done. In other years, we may be at 20% of what we were in the highest work year. So you don't really want to staff internally for that kind of uneven workflow.
Sure, because it defocuses off of their core expertise of providing value, whatever that may be, product, service to their customers.
Yeah,
and innovating along those lines.
Yeah,
I'm curious, how did you get involved with this with the incentives industry, with developing a specialty in being able to negotiate incentives for companies?
Yeah, this is something that you don't plan for, you fall into. I was working for American Standard, and the company had moved their world headquarters from New York City to New Jersey. They had had a discussion with the then governor of New Jersey, and she, at the time, Chrissy Todd Whitman, said to them, I will give you an appropriate amount of incentives if you come to New Jersey. And so it was sort of a handshake deal. They came to New Jersey. She left office. She was, I don't remember the circumstances, whether she was beaten in an election or whether she just decided not to continue with the governorship. But anyway, there was a new administration in. The deal with her was a handshake deal, and I'm working for American Standard. And I'm doing very odd job projects. I work for the VP of Government Affairs, and I'm extremely comfortable in ambiguity. So he would say, go to the Czech Republic and take care of this government issue that we have there and so forth. So he said to me, we have this agreement with the state of New Jersey that if we move to the state of New Jersey, they'll give us $6 million worth of cost offsets to incentivize us. But we have nothing in writing other than a very general letter. And so he said, go down to the state capitol and see what you can figure out. And basically the short story is that successful $10 million later, I'm in a business that I did not know existed.
Wow.
And American Standard's got, $10 million more in their pocket. I've got some really nice fees, and they were paying me hourly. So in fact, I was paid to learn this business and then perform in this business. But it was a very successful, in terms of the ROI for them, it was a very successful relationship that we had. We had that for 4 years until people changed. There was a significant change in the management there and so forth.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to shift gears a little bit,
yeah,
and ask you about, from the president's perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective. Now, you've built a company that now operates in, I think you'd mentioned, at least 38 states.
Right.
So how did you succeed in building that? And I have a follow-on about how your role changed as your company's grown. But how did you go from that experience to now having a truly an interstate successful business?
Sure. The first 5 years approximately were really learning fundamentals. Who do you talk to? What do you say? And beginning to put into place procedures and processes so that you didn't have to think about what you were going to do. We also played around with a lot of different pricing strategies back then. So that was the first 5 years. And then after that, we started to try and determine who were the best clients for us and work through that process. What's the right target audience to go after? And then we started to figure out pricing strategies. And we ran into the 2009 recession, the Great Recession and so forth. And we had to totally revise our pricing to be more based upon performance than based upon services provided. We were basically here's what we'll do for you in the next year. and here's what you'll pay us, regardless of the result. And we got into that because we had relationships in the beginning with individuals who were in a corporate structure where they could say, I know Marty Abbott and he's going to perform for us, so we don't really have to worry about the outcome. But then as the economy tanked and people were saying we're paying these guys this kind of money and there's no guarantee, then we had to basically go to performance pricing. And over about 4 or 5 years, we modified our pricing so that we modified it very slowly so we could stay in business. Because if we went from where we were to the pricing structure we have now, we would have been out of business. We would have had, no to low, very low revenue for a couple of years.
Sure. That's a huge shift.
Yeah. So
let me ask a quick question about that. So you mentioned the gap in revenue. So there's that reflects the cycle times in working with the government programs to be able to negotiate and complete and bring in the actual incentive revenue.
Yes, it's a combination of cycle times and the nature of incentives, which are always performance based. So, let's say a major project is going to happen in 2 years. The company is going to build a new facility, and they're going to build it 2 years out. So we're starting right now, and we're saying to state, county, and local governments, give us your best offer to incentivize the company to do that here, do that in your state, your local area. We put those in place over a period of 6 months, let's say. The company then makes a decision to site in one state or the other, and then they start the construction period. And almost nothing happens during the construction period in most instances. And then they start hiring people. The facility is built. They start hiring people, and the incentives will generally, most of the incentives will flow in over 5 years. So that's sort of the time period in which. So we're getting some money in our pricing structure to do the work to put in place the incentives. We're getting some money in our pricing structure to successfully have those incentives in place and the company agreeing to them. So the company knows they've locked in these incentives. They know what the ROI is going to be. They make their decision on where to site the business. They make their decision based upon the incentives. In many instances, somebody will be somebody else from the standpoint of the ROI of the incentives. And then 2/3 of the incentives actually occur in terms of our fees as the incentives come in. So it could be over a period of 5 years. In some cases, it's as long as 15 years, but usually it's a period of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. So that's a very risky shift in your revenue model.
Yeah.
To go to performance based then, especially with such a long, up to 15 years. My gosh, such a long, long tail on the revenue.
Yeah, I would say the majority of the incentives are within a 5 to 10 year period of time. So as quickly as 5 years, as long as 10 years, there are a few states where the incentives come in after that, but it's not the majority by any means.
Sure. And finding that's a great innovation in response to what happened in the marketplace during the Great Recession. And, finding some way to guarantee results, guarantee work is a huge issue with service providers.
Yeah.
There's one thing to have a product and say, hey, here's a warranty on a product. Here's what we can guarantee about the product. In a service relationship, because there's work that needs to happen on both sides. It's always fascinates me to see how companies and how entrepreneurs like yourself are able to innovate and finding a way to go, look, here, we'll guarantee our work. Here's how we're going to do that.
Well, one of the things that we have formularized is what to expect on the revenue stream on the back, what's called the back end of our revenue stream. So that's 60% of our fees that we get when the company performs what it promised to do in terms of adding jobs, investing, and so forth. That 60% never is 100% realized. And identifying over time what that was, what that ended up being, or what that would be, is the way you manage your revenue and your costs and so forth. So, we might say on a project where we got a certain level of incentives that we were going to have $100,000 a year coming in over a 5-year period of time, but that would be the maximum amount. In fact, when most companies go through the process, let's say it's 60% of that was really going to occur. So our fees as a percentage of that, we can pretty well predict now on an average basis. Obviously, some companies will do really poorly performing against the goals that were set and therefore the incentives that they receive, and other companies will do fairly well. But we've got a pretty good handle now on being able to predict those outcomes from a cash flow standpoint.
Yes, knowing your numbers and applying some sophisticated analysis to them.
I by nature am a very linear person from the standpoint of, that's my core. I love numbers, and I love trying to figure out things that are numbers related and so forth. And so formularizing the business so that you are predicting the outcome years in advance is pretty important.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to also ask, because you mentioned the first 5 years are about, the comment was, getting the fundamentals down, is making notes. Listening as you're watching this, have something to write with. You want to make notes. First 5 years are about the fundamentals. As your company has continued to grow, has your role changed as the president and founder, or how you think about your role in running the company?
Yeah, I think I'd say there may be 3 phases, maybe 4 phases. So in the first few years, you're basically learning the fundamentals of the business. I mean, you're learning unless you come into something where you're really the expert, when you get into something like this, you're learning all of the fundamentals of the craft of doing this business. And then after that, you're working on sales, and you're working on the service side of the business. And then you move into a period of time in which you're, at least for me now, the past few years have been really very focused on revenue. And I've hired people who can handle, and I can teach them, and they can handle the service side of the business, doing the work. And now the focus really is on finding really good people and determining what is the formula for really scaling the business. We have been a small business, and in this business of incentives and tax credits and all of that kind of stuff, there are not a lot of companies who have a bigger than 15 people presence in the marketplace. It's a lot of small entrepreneurs and small companies. And so the question is, how do you scale up and how do you really, grow the business? I think most of what we have achieved to date is understanding, if you were in a manufacturing environment, it's we have all the right machines. We've now figured that out. We've got all of the right people in place, and we have the specs for the people. We know how to operate everything. We know what the numbers look like and what the accounting should be in order to make sure that you're going to end up with a profit at the end of the year and so forth. And now the question is, how do we scale this thing? How do we really make it big?
Do we add more equipment? Do we add more square footage? Can we put another shift in?
Yeah, it's actually, it's really relates to revenue. Doing the business in 5 years, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but in 5 years, I probably learned 70 to 90% of what it takes to do the work. That's not the really hard part in most businesses, I don't think. The hard part is getting the work to be done, getting the work from clients. How do you acquire business? How do you go from a really small company with small clients to a big company with big clients, or a big company with a lot of small clients? It depends on your marketplace. and that's really that's the hard part. I don't think the hard part is making the widgets. That you can learn relatively quickly. It's how do you go out into the marketplace and sell the widgets? Who do you sell them to, and how do you how do you really do that and scale it every year? A lot of entrepreneurs in this business will be satisfied with paying the mortgage, and the once you've done that enough, or once you've done that, or you've believed that you've got that down, then the question, if you want to continue to have fun in the business, is how do you really scale this thing? How do you grow it at 15% a year consistently? Almost nobody needs the money that comes from successfully doing that, but it's the challenge of doing that that's the fun.
Well, and it creates a lot of opportunities, right? It creates opportunities for the people that are being hired. The economic benefit to the communities that those companies are doing business in.
Yeah, for sure. And on a selfish basis, it creates the opportunity for succession planning.
Yes.
For bigger time off, and for basically, deciding the fun things that come from being successful.
Playing more golf, more time with the family.
Yeah, but both. Yeah, I'm trying to do more of both of those.
Yes, can I understand that you. How did you put it? You play more than a little bit of golf.
That has varied, but it is. I used to play a lot of golf. I got to be pretty good. My lowest handicap was 7, which is not bad for a sometime would-be golfer. And then we moved, and I had to stop playing golf a lot because the country club that I was belonged to was a half an hour in good driving and an hour and a half in bad driving. So I stopped playing golf for a long period of time, and I've just been getting back to it, and I really can enjoy it now. Good.
That's part of what makes entrepreneurial life worth it, right? It's the challenge of being able to build the business, and then also being able to enjoy some of those benefits.
Yeah, no,
family and hobbies and activities.
For sure. Yeah, it's and feeling like you've got everything in place from the standpoint of the formulas of how your business runs to the people who are key to making that happen, in a way that you don't have to be present. You don't have to be as involved, and you have choices at that point in time.
Yes. I always remember listening to a gentleman, a successful entrepreneur, and he was telling the story of the first time that he went on vacation and came back and found that sales had actually grown and things had gone well, which is a good thing. But he said, the challenge that I had with that was I wasn't really sure how to feel about that. It's what I wanted intellectually, but in my heart, I was like going, but do they need me anymore?
Yeah.
So there's a big emotional transition with some of those phases as well when leading your company.
Yeah, I think if you ever get to that point, then the question becomes, what is the next challenge? They don't need me is a wonderful thing, and then the question becomes, where do you want to go with the satisfaction you get out of your business? Do you want to grow it in a different direction? Do you want to start something that's adjacent to it? What are the opportunities that come out of that? That's tremendous. I would love to take a long vacation and come back and see that this was working just fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Boss, please go take another vacation. We're doing fine.
Exactly. Then,
Speaking of vacation and golf, it reminds me of something we were talking about pre-show a little bit. You're in an area that's been affected by the recent hurricane and weather that has stirred up. How have you been doing with that?
We were lucky because we, hurricanes and weather are arbitrary, and I remember we were spared geographically where we are, and by mean geographically, I mean within a mile radius of where we were. Everything was fine here. A lot of water and so forth and so on, but no permanent damage.
Good.
But the weather is so arbitrary. My wife and I were about to buy a house a number of years ago in Greenwich, Connecticut, where we lived for a long time, and it was in what's called backcountry, so away from where most of the civilization is. It was near the airport, and we had a tornado come through, which was very unusual in the Northeast. Very unusual.
Yeah.
And a significant tornado. And we were probably a month from when we would have made a commitment on the property. It was not selling fast. It was a big piece of property. It was, as I say, in backcountry, so you had to spend 15 minutes to get to town, which in this part of the country is, a long period of time. And it was near the airport, so there were a lot of factors to consider. And the tornado that came through went right through the property and took a swath of trees out about 75, 100 feet wide, and just scarred the property. So, so we were spared here during the most recent storm. It's a long way of answering your question. And some neighbors maybe a mile away, had to really, bail out their basement and cut some trees down and do a lot of things like that.
It's incredible. I grew up in the Midwest, so I completely understand about the tornadoes. And you're right, that's so rare.
Yeah.
Because we used to, when we go through tornado season, if it was a bad year and a tornado hit, sometimes we'd tour some of the neighborhoods near us that got hit when we didn't. And, it'd be unbelievable. You see two houses. I remember as a kid seeing where a funnel cloud had gone between two houses and like ripped both of them in half, didn't touch anything across the street.
Yeah.
It's just, it could be so capricious. And to see that kind of damage a mile away, but yet your local community was safe, it's great news. And it's just always a reminder of how close stuff can get.
It's sort of analogous to life in general. I mean,
right.
Life is very arbitrary. We attribute a lot to people and their intention and their hard work, but in fact, there's a lot of luck involved, or a lot of just avoiding, big problems that's involved in being successful.
Yes. Well, and as you demonstrated during the Great Recession, being able to stay attuned from a business perspective, being able to stay attuned to what your customer needs are and adapt to that.
Yeah.
As opposed to just writing it out, as many businesses do. During a recession in the 1990s, I watched a acquaintance of mine build his business out in the construction industry when most companies were either folding up or hunkering down, and he even went against his board of advisors, which was very rare.
Mm-hmm.
And when the economy turned around, their business just exploded. Like you pointed out, he didn't do anything unreasonable. He didn't risk the business, but he went against the grain of the conventional thinking.
Yeah.
And was set really well when the general economy picked back up.
One of the things that we've done in the last 5 years, which is from a pricing standpoint and from how we adjusted to the recession and learnings that came out of that and so forth, is we actually offer now our analysis and recommendations at no cost. Which is where all of the value is.
Mm-hmm.
But we basically say to our customers, if you sign our agreement, and you have to understand that there's reasonable payments that you'll make over time. And we have to obviously go through and explain why those are reasonable and when they occur and so forth and so on. But if you'll do that, we will come to you and we will present all of the greatest ideas that we can. We'll tell you how specifically to go about getting the incentives. What's the best way to negotiate these? How many different sites do we have to look at? We'll go through all of that, make those recommendations to you at no cost. Only then, if you're satisfied that the recommendation makes sense from your standpoint, do you need to pull the trigger and start paying us money.
Mm.
And that's been a tremendous business getter, because it almost eliminates the risk. Now, the one thing that you have to do is you have to commit to us, because if we make good recommendations and for some reason or other you don't want to use us, but we're capable of doing the work, you got to use us. That never
Sure.
happens. Never an issue in that regard. But it's a great pricing strategy, to give away, quote unquote, all of the goods, 90% of.
I was just thinking that it's like 90% of the value up front. You're
Yeah.
giving them practically a master's degree education
Yep.
in what's available
Yeah.
and how to go about accessing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, we lay out things like, what programs are available in each state, county, and local government, what the requirements are to successfully apply, what the requirements are to successfully manage that over time, what are the reporting requirements, who else has taken advantage of these programs, and what are the dollars that they have gotten in terms of incentives, and a number of other factors that basically lay out in extreme detail what the company is accepting when they say to us, okay, go forward. And then we have a plan that we have to deliver on, and the company has to deliver on in terms of their investments and so forth. And then the outcome is pretty much assured, as opposed to going in and saying, I'll charge you $5,000 a month and I'll go out and see what there's available for you. That's not, in a way, there are a lot of people who do that, but that's not how you're going to get the most business.
Mm-hmm. But and that works in terms of from the client side, being able to access incentives like that is viable, even for, as you'd mentioned, in the majority of companies or 15 employees or less. That works for small as well as mid-sized and large companies.
Not sure what your question is. Is your question?
I apologize. That was kind of a word salad. It's in terms of being able to identify incentives for the smaller companies as well as mid-size and larger companies.
Yeah. So it's the same process.
Okay.
Let's say a company comes to us and they're 5 people right now and they want to grow to be 50 people. And their plan is over the next 5 years to execute that and to add 15 jobs a year or whatever, until they get to 50 people. And they know what the salaries are going to be or what the wages are going to be and so forth. The process is pretty much the same. We will come back to them and we will say, on the basis of the work we've done, the research we've done in your state and in your county and in your local government in terms of the history of incentives, here's what we can tell you is a plan for us to go out and get incentives for you. And here's the dollars that you'll get or the tax credits that you'll get or whatever. The minimum size in terms of jobs to be added that will qualify almost anybody for getting incentives is 25 over 3 years. So add 8 plus jobs a year for 3 years, and we can get you some money. And the nice thing about the small projects is they can happen very fast because it's very formulaic. So if you come to us and you say, okay, I've got 3 months before I want to launch my business, I'm going to have 25 people added over the next 3 years. And their salary is going to be X, and I'm going to cite them in this location, so forth and so on. Within 3 months, we'll have all of those projects. We'll have all the financials worked out in terms of what we're going to get, when we're going to get it, how it will impact the company, and so forth and so on. The bigger companies and bigger projects are going to take a little bit longer, but the small ones, because the state, county, and local governments will say, oh yeah, that's one of those small projects. Okay, fine. It's very formulaic at that level. And there's not a lot of negotiating. There's not a lot of upside or a lot of downside. It's, here's the package, so it's pretty straightforward.
That's pleasantly surprising, because that's way smaller in terms of growth than I would have thought. And the fact that it has been made somewhat routine, so that for companies to qualify, it's like, yeah, here we can move fast. That's always a pleasant surprise with anything related to government.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that so much as a dig on government. It's just that there's processes that need to be followed and procedures and whatnot to make sure everything's done appropriately based on what the government's offering, so they can make sure that they're not misstepping. That's great to hear. I mean, that opens up a lot of options, I think, to entrepreneurs that otherwise wouldn't have realized
Yeah,
that they could access that.
It took me the 5 years to basically learn how to do that in such a way that, you know, that it can happen in that period of time. What do you have to serve up to them? How do you have to serve it up? You know, what are the steps that you have to take in terms of introducing people, not introducing people? What documents do you have to provide? All of those kinds of things. You have to, you know, the first time out, I'm sure I stumbled. The first time out, I was being paid by American Standard, going back to what happened in the very beginning. I was being paid by them on an hourly basis. I was a consultant, and they were just paying me on an hourly basis, so I could make a lot of mistakes. And I did make a lot of mistakes, but my approach wasn't, I have to be perfect first time out. You know, so over time, I figured out how I had to be perfect in terms of spending the least amount of time to get the best value for the customer, because my fees are going to be based, as they are today, on a percentage of what the customer is going to get, what my client's going to get in terms of incentives. I don't have any fixed fees anymore where I can charge a certain dollar amount on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marty, I'm watching the time, and I promised that we're running over from what I had promised you, and I want to be respectful of your time. And as you're watching this, we don't want to run too long either, because we're just scratching the surface, and we could go for hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's clear that brings so much value to the table and helps entrepreneurs access funding incentives that they probably didn't realize. I certainly didn't, you know, that it would be possible for their level of growth, especially when they're hitting that point that they're starting to scale up, to bring that to the table.
Just as a ballpark way to think about things, if you're spending $100, you should expect that you're going to be able to get incentives that are between $5 and $20 to offset that cost. And that $100 could be a service business where you're spending money on people, plus maybe a little bit of rent, or it could be a manufacturing operation. At the 5% level, it's probably a service business, but on a manufacturing operation, because the money that's being spent by the manufacturer is going to be around for 20 years. So it's guaranteed long-term revenue for state, county, and local governments, and they're going to pay more for that. But if your business plan has a investment in the first year to 3 years of $100, you need to write a line in saying incentives from state, county, and local governments somewhere between $5 and $20 is going to be my cost reduction on all of that above.
That's a huge help.
Yeah.
Huge help.
It is a huge help, especially, most people, you know, it's an afterthought for most people. But it is something that, you know, you should be planning to put into the P&L as soon as you're beginning to develop that P&L. And you ought to be thinking, you know, I'll put in that ballpark. Maybe I'll start off with 5%, and then I'll hire somebody like Marty and his crew, and then figure out what I really should be putting in there. But when a lot of small companies, entrepreneurial companies, before they go to investors, really need to be doing this, because it can dramatically impact the ROI of the business plan that you put together.
Yes. Well, as we saw with the temporary COVID funds. Yeah.
Some of these government funds are just, you know, they can be very impactful to a business plan.
Indeed. So, Marty, what's the best way for entrepreneurs to get in touch with you to learn more about how you can help their company and what incentives may be available to them?
They can go to our website. The easiest thing to do is just call me on the phone. That's the website address that you've got there. And, you know, my phone, I don't know whether my phone number is on the website or not. But it's easy enough when you get to the website to figure out how to get to me. I think my phone number, or maybe the company phone number, is there for sure.
Okay.
But the other thing is to go to LinkedIn and send me a message through LinkedIn.
Yes, which is how we met.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I probably 95% of inquiries come through LinkedIn. We have a huge marketing campaign through LinkedIn, and that's the reason why most of our inquiries come through LinkedIn.
Okay, excellent. And see, that's another potential conversation right there, is how you're effectively leveraging LinkedIn to help build your business. We'll save that for another time.
We spent three or 4 years perfecting that, and now
Wow.
there's a steady stream of of inquiries come in. Hey, I enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity you've given me.
Good. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is Marty Abbott. He is the president and founder of Incentive Management Group. And as an entrepreneur, there are incentives beyond the COVID incentives, which are starting to expire. There are incentives available for you from your state, local, and county government that will help you under right circumstances, help you with building your business, with scaling your business up. And Marty is one of the leading authorities in the U.S. on being able to access those. He does business in multiple states, so they're probably working in your state. Reach out to Marty to learn more. Marty, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Thanks for all of your time and interest.
And thank you for watching Wolfe's Watch. I'm Wolfe, and I will see you on the trail.